Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to piece together one of the most important moments in Australian history. We're talking about the story of how a whole continent of separate colonies became one single country.
But first, just imagine this for a second. What if Australia wasn't one nation? What if you needed a passport to go from New South Wales to Victoria? What if they had their own money, their own armies, even their own train tracks that, believe it or not, didn't even line up at the border? It sounds kind of chaotic, right? Well, for a long time, that was the reality.
And that brings us to the big idea for today: federation. Now, it's a fancy word, but I want you to think of it like this. It's like solving a giant continent-sized jigsaw puzzle. Federation was that click moment when all those separate, disconnected colonial pieces were finally brought together to form one complete picture: the Commonwealth of Australia.
So, here's how we're going to put this puzzle together. First, we'll look at the divided continent before Federation. Then we'll walk through the path to unity, meet the key people who made it all happen, and finally, we'll uncover why this whole story still matters so much today.
All right, so let's dive into part one. What did this Australian jigsaw puzzle actually look like before it was assembled? I mean, just how separate were these pieces really?
Well, the reality of daily life back then is pretty fascinating. We're talking about 6 colonies that basically acted like their own little countries. Each one had its own money and its own stamps. Each had its own tiny defense force. And the train tracks? Oh, the train tracks. They were famously different sizes at the borders. So, can you imagine traveling from Sydney to Melbourne and having to get off the train, haul your luggage across the platform, and get on a totally different train, all because the tracks didn't match up? It was a mess, and it really showed just how divided things were.
Okay, so if life was that complicated, how on earth did they fix it? Well, that brings us to the path to federation. The amazing story of how all those separate pieces started, slowly but surely coming together.
You know, a lot of the time, a huge movement can be traced back to one person and one powerful speech. This is Sir Henry Parkes, a guy often called the father of federation. And with this famous line, he was doing something really clever. He wasn't just talking about politics, he was appealing to this idea of a shared identity, arguing that, hey, the people in all these different colonies were all connected. We should be one. And that was the spark that really lit the fire.
But let's be real. Turning a great idea into an actual nation is a massive job. It did not happen overnight. From that first speech in 1889, it took more than 10 years of debates, conventions, drafts, and public votes to hammer out a constitution that everyone could get behind. It was a long, tough journey that finally ended up in London, where Queen Victoria herself signed it into law.
And then, the moment finally arrived. On the very first day of a new century, January 1st, 1901, the wait was over. The Commonwealth of Australia was officially a real thing, and those 6 separate colonies became states within a single united nation. Pretty incredible.
Of course, a project this massive doesn't just happen. It was driven by some really passionate and dedicated people. So, who were the architects who actually designed this new Australia? Let's meet them.
This was a real team effort, for sure. You had Sir Henry Parkes, the visionary who first got the ball rolling. Edmund Barton was the leader who steered the whole thing across the finish line. And yep, he became our very first prime minister. You had amazing speakers like Alfred Deakin and brilliant legal minds like Andrew Inglis Clark, who actually looked at the American system for inspiration. And so importantly, you had trailblazers like Catherine Helen Spence, who fought hard to make sure women's rights were part of the blueprint for this new country.
So the puzzle was finally complete. A new nation was born. But so what? Why does a decision made over a century ago still matter in our lives today? Well, let's look at the lasting impact of federation, because it's everywhere.
Seriously, think about it. Federation isn't some dusty old idea from a history book. You see its results every single day. The Australian dollar in your pocket? That's because of federation. The idea of national parks, having one set of national laws, and our federal parliament in Canberra? All of that exists because the colonies decided to team up. However, and this is absolutely vital to understand, that new national picture was not complete. A massive, crucial piece of the puzzle was deliberately left out. For the first 66 years of Australia's existence as a nation, Indigenous Australians were not counted in the census. They were largely excluded from the rights of citizenship. It's a really somber and critical part of this story that we have to acknowledge.
And that brings us right up to today. That federal structure is exactly what makes huge nationwide systems possible. Think about Medicare. A national program like that can only exist because we have a federal government to run it. The fact that schools all over the country can teach a shared curriculum, that comes from this unity. And our shared national identity, that feeling we get when we come together on days like Anzac Day, that is a direct legacy of this decision to become one people.
So when you boiled it all down, Federation was Australia's first massive team project. It was the moment a bunch of separate communities took a step back, looked at the bigger picture, and decided, you know what, we'd be stronger and better together. Which kind of leaves us with the final question to think about. If that was the great unifying project of the 20th century, what should be the next one for the 21st?